We interrupt our normal informational program for a rant. But is it really not informative? We'll find out. Today we're talking about the current state of the jungle. And in order to do that, I want to tell a little bit of a story first. So recently I've been playing a few more jungle games and I've not been feeling it. I felt that every other game was off really and I didn't know what was going on, what was going wrong, what the problem was. And eventually I tried really hard to do well and sometimes it worked out, like in the background footage for example, but in many games it simply didn't. And I tried to figure out what was going wrong. I first figured it might just be because I just came back from playing on a bed basically with a spongy mousepad and wasn't used to my desk anymore. Then I thought it was maybe because my current mouse broke and I have to use an alternative mouse and that may feel off. Then I thought maybe it's the game that has been like jittery and laggy lately, which is still the case, but I used some fixes to improve it a little bit at least. Tip on that hand, turn off F-Lux while playing games if you're using it. But none of that really seemed to solve the issue for me. I still felt like my impact in the game was significantly lower than it should be and that I was doing a lot more poorly and that a lot of kills, especially where I thought this will be a kill, simply didn't happen. And that was when I remembered that in the most recent patch, along with some other changes, we also had multiple nerfs to the jungle. And those nerfs in particular are a nerf to the speed buff and a nerf to Assassin's Blessing. The speed buff was decreased from 10 to 5%. And the description was as follows. Speed is one of the strongest stats in the game, especially when gods get a critical mass of movement speed. Speed buff should provide a nice supplement to the god movement, but currently it allows for players to rotate very quickly. That sounds like what a speed buff is intended for because the name says speed buff. But hey, farm efficiently. That sounds like something a god should be able to do. Farm efficiently. Because every other role can farm efficiently as well. And chase targets more effectively by itself. That sounds like something a speed buff is supposed to do. Allow you to chase targets better, which is your job as the jungler. I mean, it sounds like Hi-Rez is telling us that the speed buff shouldn't do the things it was made to do. It shouldn't do the things that its main purpose are effectively. The level of speed provided is problematic early on in a match. Okay, so we could like scale it up more to late game, right? No, wrong. We are decreasing the movement speed provided by it to 5% to put the brakes on its overall power. Junglers will be able to recoup some of this loss later in the game when it's healthier to have that level of speed. Okay, fair enough. Again, this could be logical. Through the adjustments to Assassin's Blessing. Okay, so Assassin's Blessing gets a level of movement speed in return and it evens out. That would be nice if it was actually the case. But what happened was Assassin's Blessing got a nerf too. The power level of an evolved Assassin's Blessing compared to an unevolved Assassin's Blessing is large, more so than other blessings. Maybe that's because basic Assassin's Blessing is terrible stat-wise. It has nothing for a fight. Assassin's Blessing is there to clear the jungle and that's it. So of course, if you put anything on it, it's gonna be a major advantage over the base version. We want to bring it more in line with the rewards for other blessings. So the logical conclusion would be, okay, if the pen is the problem here, then we split up the pen. We give the item 5 flat pen from the start and then another 5 flat pen later. Well, Hi-Rez did one part of that. They unfortunately forgot the other one. Change the evolution bonus from 10 penetration to 5 penetration and 5% movement speed. What was the purpose here? So that if you get invaded, if your speed buff gets stolen, you lose less. And if the enemy invades you while they have their fully stacked Assassin's Blessing and you don't, you lose less. What is the real outcome here? Every jungler just gets less across the board. You get less movement speed in the early stages of the game, which was already nerfed in previous times. You get less penetration at any stage of the game, as you now only get 5 flat penetration from Assassin's Blessing, and outside of that you have 5% consistent movement speed now, but pretty much every jungler secures their speed buff most of the time, and even if it gets invaded, then they pay extra attention to the next one. So that's normally not much of a problem. This is a nerf that is heavily based on dual lane underperforming. And now think what happens if one role or two roles are underperforming. and you nerf one of the other roles, what's going to happen? Are these 2 roles going to go up? Or are the remaining 2 roles that weren't underperforming going to go up? Exactly. Especially Solo got its own set of buffs, and Solo is heavily on the rise. Some of you may remember the meta where Solo was always 3-4 levels ahead. We are getting towards that again. Not through the XP, through the imps, but just through nerfing the other classes down. Now you may rightfully say that you think those are relatively minor nerfs, and that impression may be fair. Most people probably wouldn't agree, but let's look a little bit at what happens to buff camps over time, or happened to buff camps in the past. So I took an older set of all jungle buffs, must have been from 2-3 years ago now, and looked at what stats they had then. There was a previous version before that where speed buff even had attack speed along with everything else. That's long gone. Let's just talk about the more recent version. So at that time, all buffs lasted for 2 minutes, but the respawn timer for camps was 3 minutes, which is why the values were a little bit different and were later adjusted. In case of the speed buff, the movement speed back then was 20% flat. Now we have 5% plus up to 6% if you kill 3 minions, and then that lasts for 15 seconds. So it won't help you much in a team fight, for example. It helps that this goes through assist as well. So effectively, speed buff got nerfed by roughly 75 to down to 50% depending on the situation. So it would be logical if other buffs get nerfed over time as well. That happened, for example, for the red buff. The red damage buff used to give 20% magical power and physical power, and 10 magical power on top of that, or 5 physical power. What does it do now? It now gives 10% magical and physical damage, so also halved, but that's only one part that's halved, because it still gives 10 magical power and 5 physical power. So it's not actually that much worse overall. Also, much more importantly, it still does 15% extra damage to gods. So it was only a 25% nerf overall, or less if you consider all the stats. Then we have the blue buff. The blue buff used to have 25 MP5 and 10% cooldown reduction. The blue buff still has 10% cooldown reduction. Now it has 15 MP5, so 10 less, which is arguably the less significant stat here, and it's less than half again. And also it got a new effect: hitting an enemy god restores 2% of your missing mana once per ability. So effectively you have more MP5 that way as well. And then we have the purple buff. The purple buff used to give 10 flat protection reduction. That actually got buffed and now gives 10 protection reduction to gods with +2 per enemy god in a radius. And it can also be held by 2 players, and the effect stacks. Notice something? Not a single buff got nerfed nearly, not even remotely close to speed buff in terms of their performance. Some may argue that speed buff was OP in its original state, and that's why that happened. The question here is, if it was so OP, then why weren't junglers constantly OP in every single meta as long as this buff was available? Because they really weren't. There were many metas where junglers were on the lower end because they often had to share camps as well. Then there were other situations, it just always varied. But right now, as it stands, the speed buff is simply garbage compared to the other buffs. It offers way less in most situations. Now, as I do when I'm annoyed with something, I post about it on Twitter, and I had a very interesting discussion with Ataraxia about this. His perspective was that he values movement speed to a degree that he thinks it's still equal, if not better, than other buffs. And maybe from the perspective of a hunter player, that may make more sense, because values of different stats for different characters are different. For example, in the context of assassins, melee assassins often losing a lot of that movement speed the moment they go into a fight as well. It makes a difference. But that same discussion also had replies from Adapting and from Captain Twig. Adapting said, honestly, at this stage, I'd rather take a blue over speed. Speed is trash right now. And Captain Twig said, I actively give away my speed in hope of taking a red or purple nowadays. Not sure if that's true for any situation or how much of an exaggeration that was, but you get the idea here. Speed isn't very valuable in many situations. In fact, what I'm probably going to do more after testing it out with Achilles and it going rather well is going into Talaria boots and effectively also trying to find ways to skip Assassin's Blessing altogether and find the sustain in other ways or on guards that work differently in that regard, because it really doesn't seem to be worth the investment for Assassin's Blessing either. And stuff like this gets highlighted even more by nonsense like this stupid solo invade on speed, where solo laners will just go into speed and try to steal it or at least delay it. That tactic can obviously very easily be counterplayed if you have your solo laner paying attention to it as well. You have 3-man rotation on that solo laner and you get a free kill before the game starts. Why not? But at the same time, the fact that a solo laner can even dare to do that, the fact that their blessing is so much better that they don't really have to fear an assassin on level 1 at all, as their blessing in comparison offers nothing in a trade, is super questionable to me. Give assassins some benefit on their blessing. Every other blessing can be used in a fight. Even Guardian's Blessing has multiple defensive stats that actually more than counter out an upgraded Assassin's Blessing in terms of the pen versus defense. Assassin's Blessing gets nothing. This item is only useful for PvE until you upgrade it, and then you get 5 pen and 5% movement speed. Hallelujah. Most junglers are designed for early to mid game, to get ahead in early stages and to aggress on the enemy. In order to do that, you need to have stats that allow you to do that. And these stats are being taken away. And the more I play, the more I have a feeling the best gods in jungle right now are warriors that can roll out towards mid-late game more and that work with other items that work better with Talaria with higher base damage. And that's exactly the meta we're shifting into, and it's really annoying me. I don't think that the issue that level 2 invades on Duo were are fixed by the nerfs to jungle. I think the fix to that should have been some sort of system for more rewards for Duo, and also the idea that maybe supports should start warding on level 1 again in order to prevent stuff like that from happening. Honestly, to me, unless you're playing warriors, jungle right now is the most unfun jungle has ever been, and that includes the seasons where you had to share all the camps. At the end of the day, you're still doing sharing to some degree, but ganks feel completely underwhelming in way more situations than before, and I don't think that's how it should be. I hope you enjoyed this rant. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button with the bell, it really helps me out. If you didn't like it, feel free to argue in the comment section down below and rip each other's heads off. Please don't do that. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.